Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to AIQRATE webinar specials, the CXO series. Today's topic is unlocking growth and scale transformation in CPG with AI. And to discuss on this, we have with us Kapil Malhotra, ex-analytics head at PepsiCo, Samir Dhanrajani, CEO and co-founder at AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting would be the moderator for this session. Before we begin the session, request all to be on mute throughout for better webinar experience. Use the chat window for sharing your questions for Q&A. We are also recording this webinar, and the recorded webinar will be made available on our website www.aiqurate.ai and also on our YouTube channel. Now introducing today's guest. Kapil brings 18 plus years of progressive leadership in business analytics, strategy and planning, operations, and go-to-market, specifically in the functional domains of insights, marketing, sales, pricing, and supply chain. In his recent capacity, Kapil drove analytics agenda for PepsiCo AMENA sector, accelerating the foundational analytics capability to better support business decisions and to drive transformational initiatives aimed at future-proofing PepsiCo in the areas of business and consumer 360, commercial analytics, and resource optimization. Prior to PepsiCo, Kapil was with Accenture, where he was leading digital campaign analytics for Google, driving hyper-targeting amongst SMB customers on big data platform. Kapil has also worked with Genpact, where he had his longest tenure, and Marketex, Blue Star Infotech, and Daewoo Motors. Kapil, it's a pleasure to have you in our webinar specials. Thanks for making time. Let me now hand over the session to Samir. Samir, session is yours now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, NK, for such a kind introduction, and I'm honored to be part of this platform. So, looking forward to the conversation. Hi, Samir.
Thanks, Kapil.
Great. Hi, Kapil, and great to have you at the CXO series session. I think just to kind of get the ball rolling, a lot has been said in the last few months about industries facing unprecedented challenges, specifically when it comes to kind of the business growth, scalability, and also in terms of even ensuring that they remain solvent and even kind of relevant. Having said that, CPG is a very different ballgame altogether, and you've spent a substantial time in your previous assignment working across various analytics interventions and initiatives. Help us first understand what's happening in the CPG industry. I mean, give us some lay of the land, some of the new trends, some of the emerging aspects, some of the strategic shifts and model changes which are happening. I think let's start with that, then we'll get the ball rolling into subsequent themes.
Your question itself, and so I'll keep it as succinct, and as we go forward, I think we can cover each of those specific challenges and is dealing with that, and especially with the learnings of COVID, right? Such an extreme event of us. So while CPG, to a certain extent, has been a beneficiary as well, certain pockets. From here, I think the CPG companies which really translate all the learnings from this environment, de-risk themselves across various functional domains, and deploy, obviously, find answers, whether through AI, technology, and others. I think there'll be serious conversations going forward. So that's my reading. Going back, I think the consumer, all CPG companies are, at the end of the day, try to be as much consumer centric, right? So because all the products have to talk to the consumer needs, as today in the present scenario, and what they will be in, say, coming future, and hence the planning happens that way. The product innovation pipelines get filled that way, right? So the entire bucket of consumer behavior anyways has been very important for the CPG companies in COVID environment. And what it taught us was how the consumer behavior, the newest challenge, is going to take shape now, right? In the future. Um, we all know it's no rocket science that within CPG, health and hygiene, for example, has got a good boost, right? So that's one. But there are a whole lot of other categories within CPG where the implications of that, understanding that very well, will need to be a key ask for the organizations or to find answers for, right? So I think that focus gains that area gains a lot more momentum. So that's one. And obviously there are macroeconomic changes, there are job security issues, things like that, right? So all associated with this event that happened. Now, in small pockets, these events or disruptions have happened in the past, but people have always noted them as short term. Things like demonetization in the context of India, right? Or GST implementation also was a disruption. But COVID is massive scale; it's global, and so I'll stop there. We all know how it's changing our lives and everything else. So the consumer behavior is a one big bucket. I think the second big bucket is go to market. Um, the entire go to market sales and go to market got hit badly, right? So, and before that production also, but let me focus on the sales and go to market side. So, which is because roughly say 30 days inventory, 30 days usually available in the pipelines, right? To even fill for. So, I think that mixes got obviously there was an entire blackout period, so let's not talk about that. But going forward, how to best reach and first of all reach consumers and which are the right channels, how the channel mix is now going to play in the future, what should be the trade practices, right? And where are the opportunities of growth more versus lesser? So the entire landscape more connected to the consumer trends also is going to be a big bucket as I see, right, going forward. And I think the third big bucket is the whole planning strategy and planning, right? So most of the CPG companies invest a lot in planning for the following year, which brand launches, what will be the marketing, and where to put the money in total expenditure, right? So to for products. So and the entire supply chain network therein. So I mean, from overall strategy plan or an annual operating plan, the translation that happens to each of the functional domains is going to be now different going forward. It's going to be more tied to, again, I said, companies are consumer centric. So that consumer marketing insights brings to the table and everyone signs off to is something that then the entire change is going to happen through the functional domains and what's going to work and what cannot work in the future, right? So these are the three things. Obviously there are obviously then whole lot of what is the right pricing going forward. So LUPs or lower unit price points are going to gain importance for now, or whether and things like that, right? I'll stop here. I just wanted to cover these three broad areas, and then yeah, open to your thoughts and how do you think we gel well with your thinking?
Sure. So let's peel each I mean of these pieces. You mentioned customer experiencing. I mean customer experience, pricing, supply chain. I mean I want to take the first aspect about customer experience. Now the fact over there is that on one side we have
Hmm.
a lot of digital new age organizations, enterprises, platform kind of companies which have invested heavily on building what I call a top of a line customer experience. Each and every data point is being analyzed to not only kind of, let's say, innovate the whole value chain, but to even new product personalized for the consumers and customers. Having said that, on the side of the CPG, if you have to really rack stack this whole customer experience, where do you think overall the CPG industry is today on the customer experience side, and what needs to be done to enhance or take it to the next level?
Samir, this is NK here. Looks like there is network issue at Kapil's end. Maybe it will be a good idea to have him log out and log in again, please.
Okay.
Yeah,
So we can just pause, and can you just call up Kapil
yeah,
and ask him to log in again?
I'll be doing that.
Kapil, sorry, I think there was some glitch. Did you hear my question, or you
Am
want me
I
to
audible?
say that again?
Am I
Yeah,
audible
Yes,
Kapil,
you
now?
are.
Sorry for that. I don't know
you
why that
you are
happens.
Kapil. Looks like there is slow network bandwidth at your end.
Okay.
If there is any other device connected to it, maybe switching off that would help, especially any video streaming, etc., that is happening on the same network.
Sure. No, okay, so let's carry on. I'll try to switch to a different network also. But
Sure.
yeah, it would be best, Samir, if you could just restate your question. Uh,
Okay. So I'll say that again, Kapil. Let's take the customer experience piece first. Now, on one side, we have a lot of these new age digital organizations, a lot of these kind of I call it rather exponential technologies led companies who are really coming out with personalized, bespoke customer experiences. And not only to that extent, they're also creating and innovating new product and services for the customers. How do you rack and stack these kind of, let's say, bespoke, personalized, well curated customer experience versus what CPG industry is doing overall today? And what needs to be done in the CPG industry on the customer experience to take it to the next level?
no, absolutely. So, great question, Samir. First of all, there's no comparison. For the kind of companies that you mentioned as example, or being digital at the core is part of their business model, right? So, and we are now come to the CPG world. We are talking about companies who sell soaps, who sell shampoos, who sell food products, and things like that, right? So, so they manufacture themselves, or a third party manufactures it for them, but they market the products, right? So the entire go to market sales and marketing happens. So, so those are the CPG companies and totally focused on the consumer. So, so or consumer experience for this industry is not something I would believe has been of great focus. Okay, so far. Okay, so at the most, their experience as a word from a consumer standpoint has I right, and people do bother about our brand experiences, right? So this is where uh, are there any disruption, or I'm okay there? Sorry, I'm just checking.
No problems. Please continue.
Okay, so so those experiences have been limited to brand experiences so far, right? um, Brand experiences in the sense, and you would have you would everyone is a consumer, so in this day, and you would have felt that in some of the uh, for example, interactions with, whether at the shop or the point of sale, whether it's a modern trade store or through social media, that an experience is provided to you which is much beyond the product itself, right? But it's relatable. This is something that the brand stands for, or the brand purpose is, right? So so that area has been, I mean, pretty serious. CPG companies, at least of global scale, etc., are pretty serious about this, because it's always about making the brand and keeping the brand relevant in a consumer's life, right? So, and it has to be beyond beyond the product attributes itself, because there is enough competition, right? So there is enough and more choices available in consumer space to be replaceable, right? So what we call as repertoire, or and everything else. So that's the first part of the first point that I wanted to elaborate on your question. And the second part, from a challenge so much, that I would say, even if CPG companies want to create those consumer experiences, personalized experiences, so as to say, is that it has to rely on a lot of data around consumer, right? Which consumer product companies don't have. At best, what is being done is the traditional research continues, right? So you do product test, you have brand equity studies, you have product studies, and on one hand, and now you're tapping into entire set of social media conversations and some of the data that consumer is passing on to you through the campaigns that you run, etc., or the feedback that the consumers give basis the. But it's pretty sketchy data, right? But it's good data in certain parts, right? So creating, you would typically, for a CPG company, and most CPG companies are mass market focused companies, so it stays on top in terms of big cohorts of consumers, right? And hence, creating those experiences, or I would rather say the personalized experiences, is the opportunity to do that is also very limited, but it's growing. I'm seeing some of the products we did, for example, are more of, say, lookalike modeling, etc. Some of the analytical pieces where you could from a subset of data which is available, you could create similar experiences and reach out to those consumers in the similar fashion, right? With a high probability of success of that going to resonate, right? So that's the second point. And the third point, on consumer experience, is obviously I talked about communication aspect of, or a brand communication aspect, which I covered. But I think the third aspect is, from an experience standpoint, is that it may not even be. So it's not that companies have not tried that. There are enough, and there are some examples. For example, some of the key competition of PepsiCo has done, say, very personalized bottle designs, right, for a beverage, for the beverage, right? So those has been done, which is around experience. But is it a process? Is it something that, from an end-to-end perspective, is the entire experience through the touch point of a consumer in everyday's life is measured, and the organization is are doing something about it? No. So that's limited. And then I think the journey is slow in that regard because of this. So I'll stop here. I mean,
So
over to
if
you,
I
Kapil.
stretch this conversation, couple,
Hmm.
you said that usually it's like influenced by a large cohort. And the blending of brand experience counts in a large manner as compared to a specific customer or rather a consumer experience. But on the other side, we have today Instagram, Facebook, social media channels like Twitter. One viral campaign can actually swing the opinion or influence consumers to switch loyalties. So in that kind of a scenario, and this could happen on a real-time basis. Suddenly, some kind of a competitor brand comes with an idea. They throw kind of, let's say, money. The campaign goes viral. We see a kind of a switch suddenly we realize that okay, the sales per se sees a surge in terms of going south. In your experience, how this particular problem needs to be tackled, and the reason I'm trying to also nudge you is where is this whole analytics play comes into the picture out here.
Sure. So great question. I think there are enough examples that we can quote also, but enough and more stories come out every day, where consumers take really butcher a firm or a company, right? Basis what happened and the stand possibly an organization took, or didn't take notice of certain events where the consumers expected them to, right? So yes, it's playing social media is a double-edged sword. You really have to play it right. It's a two-way communication platform, right? So gone, obviously that's a different topic. We've gone from one-way communication to a truly an engagement platforms. And equally the voice of consumer matters. We hear that live, and it can snowball in certain circumstances if it goes unmanaged. um, I think from I would certainly believe that there were opportunities to do a better job in my experience, where um, I think most CPG companies, depending on which brand we're talking about, may have a higher or a lower digital footprint, right? So sub brands, some of the brands would play more on digital just by design or by the type of consumers they're targeting, etc. Um, but sub brands would still be, say, more brands which are just rural focused, may not play as much on, but that's changing. I'm saying just the component of online and the digital could be lesser versus the other brands. Now, so going back to my point, there were opportunities, and yes, I think with the technologies and the whole analytics space, how it's growing, you do have the data streams, right? So we had, for example, in PepsiCo, the entire digital dashboard, right? So
Mhm.
looking at all the conversations, the big keywords which are trending, and just to look at overall trends as well, and do a better engagement with the consumers. So all that was happening, but I think uh, and we tried one of these very known big data platforms. I'm just taking an example, a
Sure.
big data tool to really mine it real time, and understand where we need to intervene, or an organization or a brand needs to intervene. That's the first question, right? So whether we need to intervene or not to any situation, and then how, right? So many brands we would also so just to complete that, yes, some of those experiments were not really because those technologies were new. I'm talking 3 4 years back, but I think AI today can really help in these situations, and which is the intelligence that you need sitting on top of the big data to really advise on what stand to take, and how to even assist in drafting a communication out, right? So which are the right keywords to use? So whole language processing coming in, as well as some intelligence which is built over uh, which is relatable to the brand communication, and which is also topical, right? So now the third point is, some of these brands are being topical. So we know certain brands, even beyond CPG and within CPG, as much and participating in those conversations, right? Because
Hmm.
I think sitting aside is not a choice, or not answering or not participating is less of a choice these days. So I think the whole technology space, as we have now more evolved tools, and the AI itself has evolved, I think can, but yeah, overall, and we'll touch to that topic also, where
Yeah, which is
there
where I
is
want to
AI
come to.
maturity. Yeah,
Which is where
sorry.
I want to come to the main theme, Kapil, and you rightly touched upon some of these changes, what today is happening in terms of measuring the whole brand tonality, saliency, I mean, through sentiment analysis, or the whole facets around creating a kind of a experience or a kind of a command center. Switching back to the theme, and this is where I'm sure the participants globally will find it interesting. Let's paint a picture and help us explain the value chain of a CPG industry. And you could be agnostic or you want to pepper it with your previous experiences. Feel free at your discretion. But paint us the picture in terms of a CPG value chain, and in terms of where all today the attempts are being made to embed AI as part of the core deconstruction of the value chain, building those insights, and also amplifying the decision making for the CXOs. So let's take an entire kind of a, let's say, panoramic view, And please help us in terms of saying, okay, this is where in a CPG value chain, AI is of relevance.
Sure. No, so let's take that then. So I covered consumer behavior, right? So everything is centered around for all forward-looking global companies in CPG, even localized companies would have consumer at the center, right? So that's one. So and understanding consumer behavior deeply uh, at a pace, so not taking say 3 months to do a study and then trying to do something about it. The good part is there is a lot of with the digital evolution, there's enough and more data to tap into, right? So some of the experiments, and it's there on LinkedIn and some social media platforms also, that consumer behavior, tapping into that, trends, tapping into the trends which are shaping up in a particular, say, a market or a geography, and then translating or feeding that into the probable NPIs, right, or the new product innovations that you want to do is certainly an area where there are current use cases, right? So it's being tested out, right, in more than one organization. So that's clearly one, right? So um, second talk about is you have, and it's an easy CPG is a very easy or simple business model, right? You are manufacturing, again I covered, through a third party or your own facilities, and you're selling it off, right? But the complexity is of the entire trade system. The complexity is to do it in a profitable manner across the value chain. So from consumer, let's go to manufacturing, right? So manufacturing and operations and supply chain. I think so. I talked about the strategy part where do I put up plants of what capacity, right? So that it takes care of the growth in a particular category. So that's one, right? But coming to more tactical, more logistics optimization, your production schedule optimization, everything else around say preventive maintenance of the equipment itself. I think these are great places to, and along with IoT, right? So sooner or later we're going to see a great deployment of IoT devices, they sending signals, a lot of digital data which is being sent by the equipment is available and all talking to each other, right? So the entire planning of operations and to actually running the show of making and moving. So you're making, marketing, and moving, right? So these are the three things you're doing. So making and moving is what I'm touching together, and this is a great area, and there could be multiple use cases there, absolutely. And the third area is about, let me say, sales and marketing, right? So which is the go to market and marketing. So let me cover sales and marketing together, why these are two distinct pieces. So let's cover say 3A. 3A, sales. Okay, so sales again, is an area where you want to optimize your the entire sales force, right? You want to optimize the best way to reach to a market and to consumers, and there are various cuts, right? So sales, so it's interesting, right? Marketing sells brands, or the marketing is brand focused, let me put it that way, whereas sales is SKU focused, right? So it's an SKU which is being sold, and typically your sales practices are, so for example, even take any firm, say within a category, usually the trade practices won't vary much, while the brand communication will be very different for each all, right? So but there are opportunities. Let me take an example there. And this is where analytics was deployed, etc., which is usually your top 10 SKUs to sell to a store belonging to a particular channel and in a certain neighborhood, or a locality, has been driven through your own historical volumes, how each of the SKUs have done, right, or performed. Now, where is the landscape of which are the entire set of stores in trade in that neighborhood? I'm just taking an example, right? So whether you're available in all those stores. Okay, so first is of what is the trade profile. More than that, what is the consumer profile, right? So is it, so understanding the consumer demographics and the drivers of those consumer preferences at a granular level is a big opportunity. Okay, and this is where and obviously accounting for all the dynamical changes or dynamic changes in all those parameters, you can really tweak the go to market, the top 10 SKUs. Typically a sales, what happens, I'm just taking an example, at least in Indian market, it's a shopkeeper would not buy, would really beyond say 6 to 8 SKUs, while you have to sell 40, right? So how do you prioritize that, right? So more premium localities, you could push in more premium products, right? And things like that. So I'm saying, and this is where in for one of the for one markets we could give from an as is to a to be list, right? To go to, which certainly had a positive impact. Now I'm
So
saying
let me
because
chime
there
in,
is, yeah,
Kapil,
yeah,
and this is interesting what you're saying, and I want you to keep going. I just want to add one level of more complexity over there,
hmm,
the pricing piece. Now, you mentioned about SKUs, very vital component as part of measuring the sales aspect, this whole territory alignment to kind of incentivization, to also ensuring what SKUs are kept at what kind of a store, very essential. Pricing being very fungible, dynamic is a very critical component in the whole CPG value chain. Now, we discussed about competition coming, lurking around. Suddenly, the pricing goes for a change, and the entire financial levers of the organization, of the CPG organization, gets impacted. Within that scenario, how do you then deal with using, of course, analytics as a kind of a foundation or a bedrock, the whole aspect of sales pricing put together? I just want to put that particular piece so that you can also help explain the participants about this whole analytics leverageability in pricing and sales also.
no, absolutely. So great input there. I was planning to cover sales pricing later, but yeah, good that you pointed out. So pricing, okay, so there's product pricing, obviously. You pointed to more product pricing, and let me get to that. Then there is whole trade management, right? So there is whole piece of all the fixed components of trade lubrication to variable components or bundled offers and things like that. So it's a whole complex area, right? Which is led by sales. So entire trade pieces, which is a big cost going into the line, is what is managed typically by sales, obviously governed by finance, but in any organization it would typically be like that, right? So and so that piece is a complex piece because the dynamic changes, as rightly you pointed out, are about whether a key competition is giving more incentives, for example, in a particular geography, right? And things like that, right? So but can you drop the price? Can you match the price? So those are the, I mean, you really have to understand the impact. There are various levers like brand pull which will come into play, various levers like or various factors like your distribution strength, right? And things like that. So one has to take a decision in totality. A sales guy on the field would like to match, for example, the trade discount, okay, but it may not be wise. So you better have an engine which truly guides basis all these parameters, and there are more, right? So where you throw in all the dynamic changes are accounted for, and it provides that intelligence of what action needs to be taken, right? So that is the entire trade pricing that I wanted to cover before I move on to consumer pricing. On the consumer pricing, it's interesting. Again, it has to talk to the consumer needs. Okay, it's consumer at the end of the day has to find value. Okay, now at least the learnings we have, not just here in across the markets, is that that value is not tied to the actual price. It's not. Okay, a consumer does buy. There are a set of consumers who buy high price products. There are consumers who are ready to pay a premium because in his life that holds value, right? In his need state, it holds value, right? So you typically have those. So you have something called as pack price architecture, right? So that's a big component as part of revenue management, which is being driven pretty hard at CPG companies, right? So which is about because it rests on where your pack price architecture needs to really talk to consumers. Okay, and that's a whole piece where a lot of analytics has been used in the past, and AI can only further help elevate that. The second big piece is the entire trade management, which I just covered, and and the and the third piece is pricing, the actual pricing. Okay, so which we are touching upon. So which which again, at least in CPG companies, the learnings are, at least for certain categories I can talk about, the rounded, for example, some of the consumer learnings are the rounded price points do help, for example, right? um, the growing and developing markets, we know uh, lower or lowest unit price is the key driver of distribution, right? So this is where you make inroads through those. And in stress times also, you are buying a lower or a smaller pack. The consumers do buy a smaller pack, right? And every pack has by design, I'll stop here just by making the last before I move to marketing, is every pack uh, has a role to play in, right? So there are on the go packs versus the packs that you bring home, and the whole aspect. And you would have noticed, and anyone noticed, that certain packs are not available in all the stores. There is a strategy which is at play that certain packs will only be available in certain channels and certain geographies and things like that, right? So all that is a big strategic and tactical play that, again, given the dynamism, AI certainly can optimize it further, make quick decisions, right? So which is very important. The third piece is, and I'll come to marketing now, right? So marketing typically, I hope that I answered your question, but on marketing, uh, again, the foundational analytics pieces that you talked about, and one of the key intervention of analytics has been market mix modeling. Okay,
Mhm.
because that uh, it it because it is so comprehensive, which is across bringing all the drivers of the business wherever you have data. You can also test all other data, at least basis the assumption that these are the drivers that could be the drivers, for example. And but then what's the quantification of that, right? Or how much each driver has impacted my sales in the last quarter, 6 months, last year, and hence how do I do about? So all the elasticities that come about, all the at the end of the day, I think most people here would know market mix modeling, so I'll not delve into that. But it's a great tool which has been used for our annual operating plans, right? So
Mhm.
which is how to best allocate the monies which have only become tighter, to allocate among brands, to allocate among to whether invest in pricing or not, to whether to invest in trade or not, and then how much. And a lot of deep dives which have been done on pricing as well as media have helped take the pricing decisions as well as the media optimization decisions that we've taken, right? So that's been a great journey. That's been a capability build and only spread to amina when I moved from India to America.
So
but uh,
one of
but
the
that's
aspect,
that's one example I wanted to
while
give.
you took
Yeah.
yeah, sales and marketing, tremendous kind of, I'm sure the insights we could gather, the leverageability of where analytics comes in and how it impacts the whole value chain. One of the crucial pieces, going back to the aspect what you alluded in the initial part of your narrative, was about supply chain. This whole reach out to the consumers in the hinterlands, to the areas which is absolutely uncharted. Uh, Difficult task, but the last mile kind of a connect. last mile availability is a very vital component for a CPG organization, because somewhere this is where in the whole aspect what differentiates one versus another. Now, supply chain again. I mean, without going into too much of details, I want to take one of the question would be, what are the components within supply chain which are getting impacted by the leverageability of analytics or AI?
Sure. So let me cover that. Most of the supply chain, okay, so most of the supply chain functions traditionally have been tool driven. Okay, so um, when I say tool driven, there are tools, for example, JD is a tool for demand planning, and there are other tools which are available for logistics optimization and things like that, right? So these tools have, first of all, they go through that painful implementation. They do, right, for any big project that happens, and there is a stabilization and phase where the, not everything is rosy right after, right? So you do have to make tweaks to those tools, etc. One of the learnings was that, and typically these tools will have modeling uh, algorithms or built-in algorithms also, uh, and depending on the situation, whether it's an auto select to for a particular brand or a unit, or and you can customize, right? So there was one of the learnings where the festival tags were not set up right. Now festivals are big uh, events everywhere in the world that do trigger a higher sales volume prior to that and during that period that the festival happens, right? So I think that needed a tweaking there, right? So I think application. So that's one. So one, I wanted to stay with my core point that it has been tool driven. Yet the demand forecasting, okay, or the forecasting accuracy rather, has has not been improved drastically. Okay, so these have been huge investments. But if you ask whether the key deliverable of any forecasting tool would or planning tool would be the accuracy of the forecast or the plan, right? But obviously there have been more dynamic factors or out of control factors. But how can that whole tool be made more agile? I mean, where is that the intelligence pieces are feeding into those plans rather than running as a black box, rather than having five people actually SNOP, right? Or that process is such a waste. I mean, wherever at the end of the day, it's not so much value adding. All the discussions that happen around just the right number to call out for a weekly forecast or a rolling forecast that happens every month and things like that, right? So I think those intelligence piece, those AI can really feed in there very well. The entire route optimization, entire channel mix optimization that I talked about earlier are again a good bedrock to test some of these AI use cases. And see how I perceive, and I'll just end there. How I perceive AI is wherever there is there's higher intelligence or a great efficiency that can come in by such deployment are the best use cases to pick, right? So I'll stop here, but if there's any other part you
Sure.
want me to cover,
Sure.
yeah.
No, I think it's something which you touched nicely upon, building crucial components in the value chain: sales, marketing, supply chain, pricing. Uh, and within those, how each of these elements impact not only the kind of financial or the performance indicators, but there is a play happening over there that if one gets kind of a, let's say, tweak, the other one also gets impacted. And that's where AI comes into the picture. And that's something, if I just sum it up and kind of bunch it, couple, you talked about this AOP, the annual operating plan. Now think of this scenario, CPG company when they are, and it's more hypothetical, and I'm taking a kind of a, let's say, punt over there, when they have to decide 2021 plan in terms of coming out, what should be their strategy? What do you assume, or rather, what you kind of visualize happening from a CPG company where they will say, okay, yes, AI needs to come in as a big lever, as a big differentiator. What should go into making of an AOP, I mean, in 2021 from a CPG company leveraging AI?
Sure. No, so I'm sure AI is not something that the CEO, obviously those initiatives and that from where the AI needs to take shape as a change driver within an organization is a different topic. I'm not going there, and each organization and the leaders will have different capacities to run that. But if I were be an AI visionary and an evangelist and an analytics evangelist, so from my standpoint, what happens? Okay, in an annual operating plan, there's a lot of bandwidth of the at least the headquarter folks that get spent doing what. Okay, so let's go one by one. So there is analytics team is the starting point as well as the end point. Okay, so at least in most organizations, or insights along with analytics. Now usually there is a modeling exercise that provides forecasts, right? So there are a bunch of models that you would have developed. You will only tweak, you will run it with the recency in those drivers, and then throw out a number. Then there is back and forth with various leaders on how is that number making sense, not making sense, etc. And when that is put into a category construct along with how much I have the capacity to grow or can grow, a lot of conversations happen, right? Because at one end it has to be bottom up, where the marketing team, for example, is building their own plans, but they finally have to converge to that number, which has to be locked in, right? And similarly, the sales side of discussions are happening, and this is a huge exercise, right? So to your point, I think the ideal state, and I will take one more example after that. The ideal state um, uh, is um is about bringing all those components and data pieces so that top down and the bottom up, which is happening, happens together. So it's tied right from the beginning. Okay, so this is where I think the data integration is one part of it, but then on top of that, the AI provides all the possible scenarios for the planning, right? So I think that would be a great ideal state. The second example, in the interest of time, I'm just running quickly. The second example is demand. We talked about demand forecasting, right? So with the IoT coming up, with smart devices coming up, with video analytics, all that which is possible, etc. Imagine if you at each show, and there are companies who are now testing, there are use cases in the market where it was a costlier technology earlier. It's not so much now, right? So that makes it easier to adopt. Is the whole stream of where which SKUs are going off the shelf, right? Or are likely to become unavailable is being captured as a data stream, and that actually runs the replenishment of that, or triggers that from a replenishment standpoint, right? So avoiding out of stock situations and actually running replenishment, the whole demand replenishment, which is making it a very automated process. It even at a back one more step backward, it actually then there's no need for planning it. The whole actual demand is tied to then the production schedules, right? So only that much stock is, for example, produced, right? So these are very ideal states, but there is a journey to go from here, and I think there is enough and more opportunities to really deploy and test out some of these use cases. Very simple
Okay.
one quickly build is most organized. Sorry, Samir, I'm taking that. But the third big one, and that's the easiest one, is a lot of senior leaders would ask questions on top of data. What is my share in specific market and things like that, right? So most organizations would have their BI systems. It may not be a 360 platform where all data sources are coming together, but at least within siloed manner with on the market share data, on the consumer or media side of data, and the whole internal stack of BI, right? That all the financial metrics, the NLP or NLG, right? So if I just talk to my phone or etc. So that's the easiest adoption of AI that can happen and make it very efficient rather than asking 10 people and they getting back. That was my point.
Got it. Got it. So there's one question, Kapil, we have I want to take and then jump on to another question. This is interesting. Even I think it was a part of my even narrative also in terms of asking you. You touched upon this marketing mix modeling aspect, the whole attribution point. Today, with the advent of computer vision, sophisticated kind of machine learning, ensemble techniques, we're talking about live video feeds of maybe matches or concerts where any kind of a brand visibility, any kind of a, let's say, brand feature gets a kind of a equal kind of a incidence share as part of the brand kind of attribution. Are there any other use cases where we're talking about from here on to next maybe few years how AI and marketing for CPG companies will actually evolve to the next level?
Yeah. So let me cover one by one.
Sure.
I think whole area of consumer and competitive intelligence. So I covered consumer intelligence, but the entire competitive intelligence as well. There are always new players in the market. They might be very small in certain going unnoticed, but they could be a possible future threat, for example, right? Or there are possibly opportunities to learn from them on how the things are shaping up in a particular category. So I think that whole area of which could deploy web scraping and all the social media, big data analytics, and making it intelligent enough to then recommend to do something about it or take notice and things like that, right? So that's one area of AI that certainly I can vouch for that. Second is making the whole market on top of market mix modeling, making it more dynamic, right? So there's no dearth. Today is a world where things change every day or every week and things like that, right? So making it micro as well as dynamic. So when I say that, I'm talking about from a consumer, one of the learnings for all consumer product companies is that the beauty lies where you are going granular, right? So whether the taste, because say for food industries, the taste profile itself changes every 50 kilometers, or right, or
Hmm.
200 kilometers. So you need to have a very tweaked profile, a tweak set of products for the consumer, and even the trade profile in that market could be very different than what it is at a national level as indexed to national level, right? So because of all these very differentiating factors, I think uh, you could actually run many mmms, right,
Hmm.
at a granular level, and they could be immensely useful, and you'll need those AIs and machine learning algorithms which could really make it a very agile process. Otherwise it will be very tedious, right? So to do that, so and making it I mean be able to guide on a monthly basis at least, if not weekly, right, on what to do. So that's one. And even the last step is even measuring the plan versus action and recommending the alternate scenarios is a great area for AI, right? So that was the third one. I think the fourth one is about the whole you touched upon it actually, which is about uh, you usually test advertising copies, right? Or the ideas or the storyboards,
Hmm.
great area to test for AI, right? So, I mean, the whole initial creative development, etc., could be a great area to work along with creative agencies to test out the AI in those areas. So these are just top of my mind, and
Sure.
yeah, happy
Sure.
to.
So there's one more question I want to take. This is about market research aspect in CPG. There is a great thrust which has been put by CPG companies on leveraging market research. But the challenge over there is that typically the cycle time of a AC Nielsen or other research agencies is elongated. Versus today, we're talking about a new genre which is all about what we say customer neurosciences and behavioral science, ethnographic profiling, where customers are bunched, segmented, and there is a very different micro segmenting which gets done. What's your take in terms of adoption of this behavioral science by CPG companies and how AI can actually be blended over there to make a new meaning out of it?
Yeah, again, a great question and ties back to where we started from. So consumer behavior, as I said, is always been a very critical area for consumer companies to understand better, etc. So traditional research is now changing. Okay, so the old ways or traditional ways of researching, and many of these organizations are actually, as I know, are transforming in their own ways to have the faster ways of researching, to have more agile ways of researching, and be able to provide. So, right. So I remember 3 4 years back we used to kitna sample aayega. So how much will be the sample size, or whether you'll have repeatability in those samples, so that I can on a continuous basis be able to draw insights from that. Right. So I think most of that is possible today. Right. And it makes it at least at a first layer of giving all the directional inputs that you need, where a
Hmm.
lot of data has to be around research, especially as CPG companies are also tapping and doing more researches online, is a great area for AI deployment as a natural use case. So,
So you believe
uh,
that the days of market research is over and this will be the new wave, or you still believe there'll be a kind of a blend altogether?
I would believe it would be a blend for certain time,
Hmm.
because what happens is, because this is a journey of transformations. I think with all there's one part which is called as thick data, right? Those specific consumer studies or product studies, at least within PepsiCo, and someone, I don't remember the name, but someone popularized that term called thick data. Now, these could also be observations about consumers, say, buying in a shopping mall with a kid, and or how
Emotions
a
piece,
mother,
right?
right?
Right. Yeah.
So that thick data is very valuable, okay, for consumer product companies, even if it's a small sample, but that is very concrete, okay. Biases that are there even any kind of research, uh, but that is a valuable area, right, which is more qualitative also in certain cases than quantitative. The other side is the big data that we're talking about, and the new age tools and plenty of data to mine into. I think both will go hand in hand. In certain cases, it could be just that also. Again, I said it's a function of how much digital a brand is. For example, if it's about brand extensions,
Hmm.
just taking a specific example, but the brand is largely digital, or there are more consumers talking to in the digital space, then you have enough and more pool there where you can just base decisions depending on the digital inputs versus the traditional, right? In fact, so it would vary depending on what consumer cohorts and what type of brand is being positioned for that. So
Wonderful.
it's a journey.
Kapil,
Yeah.
would have loved to continue. We've hit time, but must say a very comprehensive, dense, but very engrossing discussion because the fact is there are so many elements, so many gyrations in a CPG industry. And personally, I have worked in my formative years in a CPG industry, Gillette at that point of time. I can so very well relate in terms of what you alluded as part of the changing dynamics. And with AI coming into the picture, there is a very different spin which is being taken together into consideration how the whole anemic nature of growth and scale can be catapulted to the next level leveraging AI. And this is what CPG industries are striving. 2020 has been a great, I would say, realization for everyone. But come 2021, I'm sure everyone will go full gusto in terms of embracing AI, and CPG would be maybe the kind of, let's say, forefront as part of this. Thank you so much for your time, insights, and absolutely a good narrative. Thank you so much. Thanks
It
all the
was my pleasure,
participants.
Samir. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks to you, and thanks and bye everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.